talking Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets today on Sharpen the Point. 2024, 7-6, slight disappointment in Brent Key. He's going to enter his third season. Buster Faulkner returns as the offensive coordinator. And then we have a replacement at defensive coordinator with Tyler Santucci moving on. Blake Gideon coming in he was the Texas secondary coach, a very good unit, and he's one heck of a recruiter. So a wonderful addition to this staff. Quarterback-wise, Haynes King returns for his third season as well as the starter off a year which was somewhat derailed by injuries in the mid to late portion of it. He was pretty banged up for about 4 games there. And it was a shoulder issue caused them really to pivot from using his arm to a much heavier reliance on his legs, particularly when we look at the North Carolina and Miami games where he really threw the ball just 26 times combined in those two compared to 31 rushing attempts. But he did gain 200 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns in those 2 games. King showed when he was healthy once again against Georgia in his best performance of the year. He showed his upside with over 300 yards passing, 110 yards rushing, 5 total touchdowns in that tough 8 overtime loss to Georgia. The pieces are really in place for him to put up big numbers so long as he can remain on the field and be healthy. It's a common theme for his career at this point that he just needs to be on the field. And with both his arms and his legs, he can just be a dynamic playmaker all over. Behind King, we're looking at Aaron Philo. He's going to be the top backup. He's the heir apparent. He played in 4 games last year, preserving his red shirt to remain a freshman. And then Philo got extensive run against Virginia Tech and NC State, but his play did leave plenty of room for improvement. He had, you can really see the talents there. He just wasn't accurate enough, and he was turning the ball over a little bit too much in each start. He did show similar dual threat ability to King, specifically against NC State with that 265 yards passing, 57-yard rushing performance. And that's really giving him that early on-field experience, and another year to learn behind King is going to go a long way towards his development as he is the future here. Running back-wise, as with his backfield mate, Jamal Haynes, he enters his third season for the Yellow Jackets after being right around 1,000 yards rushing and 10 total touchdowns each of the last 2 years. Haynes, he would have really had a better year last year. He just had injury issues as well that slowed him down. And he's a really dynamic back, almost probably one of the more dynamic backs in the ACC. And he's got plenty of speed to burn and a ton of wiggle. I remember rooting him on for that North Carolina game where he was ripping off those long touchdowns late when King couldn't throw the ball. An area of concern heading into last season, though, was the depth behind Haynes. And it really reared its ugly head when he was banged up, making King have to take on the majority of that workload with his legs. Now, though, I think the staff believes that the room is much deeper and now a strength of the offense. The addition of Malachi Hosley, he comes in from Penn. He brings a good bit of production with him as he posted a near 1,200-yard, 9-touchdown season last year. And I'd expect him to slide into that number 2 role immediately, considering Chad Alexander's banged up and he wasn't really the answer last year. And he's really probably been passed by for even that number 3 spot by Trey Lane Maddox as well. Pass catcher-wise, for the better part of the year when King was healthy, the combination of Eric Singleton and Malik Rutherford was extremely productive. They ended up combining for nearly 120 catches, 1,500 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And I was shocked and highly concerned when both entered the portal after the season, given the skill pieces coming back and the relative lack of talent behind them as they would continue in those featured roles. They're really interchangeable pieces out there. Singleton, though, left for Auburn. Luckily for the Jackets, Rutherford ended up deciding to stay, so he's going to remain at worst the number 2 passing option in this offense. And then while the portal took away Singleton, though, it did bring in 2 very talented players to replace him. The dynamic duo from Florida International last year, Eric Rivers and Dean Patterson, came over in a package deal in the offseason, and they're immediately going to give them 3 capable wide receivers, something they really lacked last year. Rivers had a breakout performance for the Panthers with nearly 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns on his own, while Patterson really played a perfect complement to him with 700 yards and 7 touchdowns. I expect Rivers to, at worst, be the number 2 target. He's a really good replacement for Singleton with a real good chance to be the number 1 guy given his playmaking ability. Outside of them, I think Isaiah Canyon presents the most size of the in the room with at 6'4". He likely has a rotational role, but the top three is really locked in for me. I think there's been a little bit of talk that he could pass Rivers, Patterson, but I really think he's going to end up being the last guy, first guy off the bench. The tight end room loses its top three, but they all, they like all three guys behind what was there. With Brett Seether back from an injury that cost him all of 2024. He's a former Georgia Bulldog. Luke Harpring, he hopefully takes a step forward after showing flashes last year as a freshman. And JT Byrne was talked up all spring. He looks more like a blocking piece for that offense. Along the offensive line, they lose both tackles and the center off of a unit that did well in pass protection. They just kind of were a little inconsistent in the run game. It was still a good unit, as that's key specialty. The guard tandem of Joe Fusil and Keelan Rutledge, it's one of the better pairings in the ACC, so they really do have something to build around coming back. Harrison Moore should slot in between them at that center spot, as he gained good experience as a freshman last year when pressed into action. At tackle, that's where our biggest question marks are. Those spots are where we need to find the right answers for this unit to have a successful kind of retooling, we'll say. Ethan McKinney, he has some experience, and I think he takes over at that left tackle spot. The right tackle spot's still up in the air a little bit coming out of the spring. Jamison Riggs looks like he probably has the upper hand here, but Peyton Joseph and Jordan Floyd aren't out of this competition whatsoever. This needs to come together so that all the skill weapons on offense really have a chance to hit their ceilings, and I really think it will. They've recruited extremely well at those tackle spots with Petty coming in. They've got a bunch of high-end recruits that can backfill in there. Defensive line-wise, they lose 6 of the top 7 and a massive amount of experience. The staff needed to get to work in the portal to bring in guys who can make an impact right away, as really only defensive tackle Jordan Vandenberg is returning. Up the middle, like with Vandenberg complimenting them, he's an athletic freak and going to be the main guy in the middle. They added Matthew Alexander from Central Florida, and Akello Stone returns from a stint at Ole Miss. They're probably going to be the main three in that middle rotation. That's where our biggest question mark on the defense is, for my money. On the edge is where they really made their hay in the portal, as Ronald Triplett from UTSA, A.J. Hoffler from Clemson, and Braden Manley from Mercer are going to need to create a pass rush right away. It's something they lacked a year ago. They need to protect the back 7 more by getting pressure with a base 4. A Triplett is really going to be seen as the best of the bunch coming off a 5-sack season there. But I would say do not sleep on Manley. He was an absolute force in the FCS last year for Mercer with 38 pressures and 9 sacks. Leveling up is going to be difficult. He's jumping up a few levels, but he could be a guy that's a real difference maker. Linebacker-wise, the loss of Trinellis Tatis, it's going to be felt, as he was one of the better pass rushers off of that unit. But getting Kyle Efford back healthy to go with Melvin Jordan, who they brought in from Oregon State, they're going to make for a nice pairing. Yeah, Efford, he's coming off a shoulder injury, but he's the most important guy on the defense as the leader of the team. He really provides a ton of juice, flies around all over the field making tackles. If they need more pass rush, I think it could come from a Cayman Spalding. They brought him in from Tennessee Tech. He showed a knack for getting after the quarterback there with 5 sacks last year out of that linebacker role. Defensive back-wise, cornerback Warren Burrell's departure, that really cannot be understated. He was a very good lockdown corner, but they do bring back a good amount of experience and a huge transfer class to really bolster the ranks here. Amari Harvey, I think he leads the room at cornerback, really steps up with Rodney Shelley being his pairing on the outside. Safety-wise, it looks like Clayton Powell-Lee and Omar Daniels would be that primary group. I think Powell-Lee's operating as a real field general on that back end and stepping up. With Gideon's background as a secondary guru, I really expect it to be a well-coached and disciplined unit on the back end. Looking at the schedule and outlook for this year, I mean, it cannot be said enough. I love the weapons this offense has, and it looks to be even better than last year. I think the the addition of both FIU guys paired with Rutherford will end up being an upgrade over Singleton. They just all need to stay healthy. They can't have Haynes King be missing. They can't have Jamal Haynes missing. So and then you got the line, right? The line's young, it's inexperienced to some extent, but Key is really good at coaching these guys up. He was a line coach for a long time, and they have a ton of talent in that deep room. They've recruited it really well. I think that it comes on strong and is a great complement for all the weapons they have. On the defensive side, the additions to the pass rush and stability along the back seven really give reason for optimism. And if anything, for me, going from Santucci to Gideon is at worst a wash from a decent unit, but I really think it's going to end up being an upgrade, as Gideon's a fabulous recruiter and he should do really well with the guys on the back end. Schedule-wise, at Colorado, they have too much turnover early in the season. I would say that this is a win given the relative strength and everything returning on the offensive side. They're going to score a ton of points. Gardner-Webb, win. Clemson, that's an early game, like a measuring stick, we'll say. I think you lose that game even though it's at home, but Brent Key really has a way of getting his team up for these big games and playing extremely well. Now, we're going to talk about in a minute why that's interesting, though. I think they play them closer than expected, and there's a ton of points in that game, but Clemson's really talented this year. Temple, win. At Wake Forest, win. Virginia Tech, I'm going to lean win. I'm pretty sure they should handle that game, but looking at this game, the at Duke game the next week, that's also a tough game. Manny Diaz has that team looking pretty good. They're both games they should win, but they're ones that historically they've showed up and lost and just put on a bad performance by comparison to when they play like a Clemson or a Georgia. Syracuse, win. At NC State, very similar to that Duke game, very similar to that Virginia Tech game. You should win this game. You're more talented, you're better. But it's another one that they tend to lose focus maybe and drop. I think they should win, but I feel like one of those three could be a bogey on the schedule. At Boston College, win. Pittsburgh, at home. Man, I don't know really what to think of Pitt. I think Pitt's going to be good again. I just think Georgia Tech should be better. They're kind of better all over and more explosive, specifically if Desmond Reed isn't just putting the team on his back. Georgia, I think that's a loss, but again, we saw it last year. It should have been a loss, and they show up for those games. They did end up losing, but they put up one heck of a fight. They show up for those games. It's going to be a fun one to see there. The hallmark of these Brent Key teams has been really some head-scratching losses where they look lost overall as a team. I know they missed Haynes King for that Virginia Tech game last year, but that's still a game they should have been able to handle even without him. Also, they play some good teams very tough. You look at the Georgia game last year. They were all over them. They pushed them to the brink and ended up losing it, but it was one heck of a performance. You put that performance against Virginia Tech, and they run them out of the building. The pieces in schedule are in place for them to be a serious contender for a conference title game appearance by not having Miami, SMU, or Louisville on the schedule. The expectation should be a minimum of 8 wins with legitimate upside for 10, with the only real predicted losses being Clemson and Georgia. And if that plays out, then the worst case scenario, they could rematch Clemson in the conference title game with a potential berth for a playoff spot on the line.